Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you. Since 2017, host Shane Whaley and Spybrary field agents around the world dispatch reviews and interviews with authors, historians, and fellow spy fans. We discuss everything from John le Carré, Len Dayton, Paul Vidic, Graham Greene, Mick Herron, Charles Cumming, Ben McIntyre, and many more. Spybrary is available on all good podcast apps and at spybrary.com.
Blown by an agent. I was never betrayed by an agent. Perversely, I wasn't betrayed by a traitor. Oddly, my cover was blown by my ambassador. He didn't want an intelligence operation in his embassy, in inverted commas, and he and his cohort willfully blew the cover of my colleague and I in our intelligence operation.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 192 of the Spybrary podcast. What you've just heard is not a narration. It's not a clip from Audible. It's not taken from a spy novel. You just heard the words of Warren Reed. He was an Australian spy, trained by MI6, served for 10 years with the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. And I have often said on this show that spy fact is often stranger than spy fiction. So today, we are going to hear from Warren Reed. He's expertly interviewed by our man in Sydney, author Bevan G Roberts. Now, Warren Reed was an Aussie spy, a fluent Japanese speaker, as I said, trained by MI6, served for a decade with the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. On this episode, we talk about overseas human intelligence work, how he undertook postings across Asia and the Middle East. After retiring from active service, Reed actually published several fiction and non-fiction books and became an active media commentator. And I think there are several reasons why we wanted to share this conversation. It's fascinating to hear from a real-life spy. Many of you have been asking for more non-fiction interviews. So we had Liz Wheel on recently. We've got more lined up for you about non-fiction espionage. But I often think that, first of all, for spy authors, especially those of you who are budding spy authors, some of the best research you can do, some of the best inspiration. And I wish I could write. Because when I read, history of the MI5 or Christopher Andrews' work, I get a million ideas of plots and characters because, just as I said, spy fact is often stranger than spy fiction. So I hope today's conversation inspires you with your writing, maybe even get you out of spy writer's block or a rut you're in and inspire you to keep writing. But also for those of us who enjoy reading spy fiction, it is fascinating to hear from a real life spy. I mean, we spend so much time reading about fictional characters that, just the nature of the work, it's very difficult to actually hear a spy speak. And when they do, it's like, do you take it with a pinch of salt? And I remember with my recent interview with Liz Wheel, I think off air, I said, it's fascinating to me as a Brit living in the United States that in the UK, you don't really know who works for MI6. And I don't know what it's like for people who work in MI6, how much they actually share with their family. Or is it, I work for the government, or I work in the trade ministry or whatever it may be. I mean, this is what we read about in spy fiction, what happens in real life. And over here, it's, Liz Wheel said, like her dad worked for the FBI. And I've heard of other people saying that they work for FBI. Haven't heard too much about CIA, but I know that goes on. And I always remember when I was in DC before COVID, seeing a motorcycle with the words United States Secret Service emblazoned across it, which kind of made me giggle. So what I'm saying is, let's sit back, let's enjoy this wonderful conversation hosted by, as I said, our man in Australia, Bevan G Roberts. Tell you a little bit about Bevan. He's actually just published his first spy novel, Kingdom of Spies. You can find all the links for that on today's show notes, which is spybrary.com/192. I'll link to that there. Just to give you a bit of background, Bevan grew up in Canberra, Australia, surrounded by technology, the military, and government, he says. That sounds like a fun neighborhood. During a career in and around, During a career in and around the Departments of Defense and Foreign Affairs, Bevan worked for a time at the Australian Embassy in Indonesia, an experience that opened his eyes to Asia and inspired his first novel, Kingdom of Spies. I haven't got to that yet. As you all know, my to-be-read pile resembles the Leaning Tower of Pisa here. If you have read it, we would love a brush past review. That's really easy. Just record it on your phone, send it to Shane at Spybrary.com, and we will air it. And I know many of you love listening to recommendations via the brush past. Anyway, enough from me. Let's talk spies with Warren Reed and Bevan G Roberts.
Most of us are fascinated by the craft of human intelligence. It's a trade as old as time, involving betrayal, secrecy, and most of all, danger. Danger to the operative, danger to the agent, danger to innocent people and to nations. And it's the human side of this danger that keeps us turning the pages and feeds our desire to learn more. So what better than to interview a real spy to find out more about the business of espionage, a former agent handler that not only practiced the trade, but also a man who experienced the worst of it. G'day spy fans and welcome. My name is Bevan Roberts, author of Kingdom of Spies, an Aussie spy thriller set in Indonesia. I'm reporting from a safe house in Sydney's northern beaches, and I'm here to debrief a very special guest for you. Warren Reed trained with MI6 and served for 10 years with the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. He was an intelligence officer and agent handler in some of the most challenging operating environments across Asia and the Middle East. And it was in one of these locations that danger struck. Warren's cover was blown, he fled the country in a hurry, and a promising career was ruined. Today, I'm delighted to share Warren's insights into the best and worst the intelligence profession has to offer. We dig into the role of human intelligence collection overseas, the sorts of challenges they face, and how things might go wrong. It'll be a fascinating insight into the craft and how it compares, if not contrasts, with what we read about in fiction. So without further ado, Warren Reed, welcome.
Thanks, Bev.
Let's start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be a spy.
Well, as with most spies recruited when they're young, and most are, though people of all ages are brought in, but most young people are identified at university because it's there that you start to display your interests. In my case with Asia, the Asian region, Asian history, economics, trade, languages, culture, everything. So I was studying economics, political science, different subjects like that, and my name was thrown up by what we call a talent spotter at a university, my lecturer, who later became a very good friend. And that's pretty typical. But spy services also have names given to them by other members of the community, but that's generally the way people are recruited. And you're recruited because, not just because your name is thrown up, but it's thrown up because you are steady, you've displayed a genuine interest in the human condition, you get on well with people, you're not unduly argumentative, you like conversation, you are sensitive to other human beings' feelings and stresses and strains. You're tolerant, and also you don't panic under pressure. So that's the sort of person young men and women that spy services are looking for. I seem to fall into that category. And then when you're recruited, of course, then you're trained, and those skills and talents that you seemingly already have are nurtured and channeled, and your strengths are harnessed, so that you can focus all of that specifically on the craft of spying.
So you served with ASIS for 10 years. To orient our readers who are mostly familiar with the CIA and MI6, KGB, etc., tell us a bit about ASIS. What does ASIS do, and where does it compare with its Five Eyes cousins?
Well, ASIS is Australia's overseas spy service. Almost every country has two main intelligence agencies. One covers domestic security, like the FBI, MI5 in England, and the overseas spy agency, CIA, MI6. Well, ASIS is another MI6. And how we came by this name, ASIS, is that MI6 isn't really MI6. That's a terminology that came from a rearrangement of the War Office in 1909. But MI6 is formally known as the SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service. So when MI6 back in the 1950s helped Australia set up a similar overseas spy service, no one knew what to call it. We could hardly call it SIS or SIS Junior. So we just stuck an A in front of it, and that's where ASIS comes from.
Thanks very much, Warren. And so you were a spy. What is it like being a spy?
Well, most spies, when they're asked that question, say it's pretty stressful. And that's certainly true. But I would tend to put first the word interesting. It's very interesting because it's fundamentally all about human relations. I mean, identifying, cultivating and recruiting traitors who in the British system of intelligence we refer to as agents, not like in America where you talk about CIA agents, FBI agents. They're actually the operative. But the whole business of recruiting and running agents is very stressful for all sorts of reasons, but it's really intense human relations. Some of it is pretty venal, but it's not all bad. And with most of your agents, much of the time, you share all sorts of mutual interests, whether it's in history, culture, food, or whatever. So if you're interested, again, in the human condition, it's a great profession, but it's not necessarily the easiest one to do. So being a spy, really, the best way to describe it is in a triangulation. There are three main points. One point, which we can dispense with quickly, is oddly you, your inner self, you as a person, your personality, your interest in books and movies, food, your friends, your family, your spouse, whatever. That point on the triangle drops away very quickly when you go overseas because the other 2 points reign supreme. One is cover and the other is your job as a spy. Now with cover, some people may think, it's just an incidental veneer behind which you operate as a spy. Well, it's very rarely that. You may be under commercial cover in a corporation. What's still more common, you may be working out of an intelligence station inside your embassy in that country. You may be working under scientific, technological cover. But whatever, cover has to be real. So the cover job you're doing by arrangement will be very real. You have real duties that no one else is performing that need to be fulfilled. And then your spying work sits alongside that, although it's many times greater and more demanding. And much of that is done in the nighttime, but equally the backup and the preparation for it is done during the daytime. So life for a spy, the real challenge, it's like you imagine a strong man like Atlas holding out in front of him or her 2 railway lines, and you're required to keep them perfectly parallel at all times and equally distant above the ground. Well, a mammoth feat. And juggling as a spy your cover life and your spy life, and spying is why you're there, not the cover work. So trying to keep those 2 things parallel and off the ground is very difficult. That's where one of the big challenges comes from, because you may have something blow up in a big way in your cover life that demands all of your attention and emotional, intellectual energy at the same time that things are running even hotter in the spy dimension of your life. So juggling those 2 to the general obliteration of the 3rd point on the triangle is one of the great challenges of life as a spy overseas.
So it sounds like a very stressful existence, let alone job. What sort of person does it take to make a good spy?
Well, firstly, you've got to be really interested in what you're doing. If you don't have or you lose your interest in the human condition, you should give up straight away. So one of the great stress reducers in the job, ironically, is that you are running a stable of agents, you're cultivating people, some you've already recruited, and generally spies don't recruit uninteresting people. I mean, after all, as a spy, you very rarely break into a building in the still of the night and take that country's most closely guarded secrets. You recruit agents, traitors, who have access to those most closely guarded secrets to bring them out to you, usually in return for money. But there can be other motivations. In recruiting people who have access to those secrets, my former colleagues and I, we tended to recruit interesting people. We found that people with access to those high-level secrets generally are qualified and interesting human beings. So ipso facto, they have lots of interests, and you do. And one way in which you cover the relationship is to mutually work out the shared interests you have. And so you don't spend all of your time as a spy with your agents only handing over and discussing highly sensitive information. You also usually get a bit of time to talk about the other things you're interested in. So again, it may sound silly, but these relationships that you have with the traitors are stressful in all sorts of ways we can discuss, contradictory in many, but they're extensions in many ways of the closer relationships that we all have as human beings. It's just that there are ulterior motives and whatnot buried inside it.
So I think you've exposed a contradiction at the heart of that relationship with the agent, which is really the core business. On one hand, you're seeking to recruit people who are prepared to betray their country's most closely guarded secrets, which is inherently untrustworthy, yet you also need to trust them with your security and livelihood, essentially. How do you manage that?
With some difficulty. It's one of the great paradoxes in a spy's life, that when you recruit an agent, they may be a boring person, but they're generally very interesting. And once they're fully recruited, they know who you are. All sorts of new dangers then emerge. But that person, you have inveigled them into committing an act of treachery. And that is the antithesis of everything you stand for yourself. You could never betray your own country. And so in doing that, you have to always keep inside your mind the fact that you are doing this for your country. Your country needs these secrets, or the broader Five Eyes Club or other allies need to be sharing these secrets. There's a purpose, there's a reason why you're doing this. So to a great degree, you don't try to ignore it, but you put that contradiction, that paradox, to the back of your mind. But one thing that you need to be constantly mindful of, and it's so easy to forget because you haven't got time to consider it, and that's where you need to fall back on spouse, family, close friends, and say, hey, I'm not trying to be instructive, but you're changing. You know, you're spending so much time with if they know what you're doing, with these other odd human beings. I mean, by any measure, it's aberrational human behaviour that you're involved in. And it's spilling over into your personality, into your very sense of identity as a real human being, not as a spy. So be careful. And it can very seriously spill over in a way that precludes you from trusting anybody in your life beyond a spy, in your cover work and your private life. It may even break up your marriage. It may destroy the relationship with your children or your closest friends or your parents, you know. So you've got to be very careful that while you're dealing with people who, by any measure, are some of the worst human beings around, even though they may be very interesting people, they're having an effect on you. It's actually like a constant drip of water on your forehead. Some spies would even say it's more acidic than that. So you've got to be very mindful of that. And it's very difficult to do that just by yourself. You need external feeding. So spies tend to be very dependent, often in ways they don't understand, on their spouse or their closest friends or whatever, because they're the ones who will tell you. They're the ones who will warn you.
Getting that relationship then right with the agent so that it's manageable for you and it's delivering results is obviously critical. What goes into recruiting that agent? Where does that process begin?
Well, it begins, let's say to start with, if you go to a country where there's an existing intelligence operation, you will inherit your predecessor's stable of existing agents. But then that won't remain static for the 3, 4, 5 years you're there. Some fall under a bus, some get promoted or demoted away from their access, and some just grow old. So you have to constantly be trawling, as we call it, looking for new people who may have the access that you're after, and you have to somehow bump into them, make contact with them, and befriend them and cultivate them and hopefully ultimately recruit them, by which I mean they know exactly what you do. You work out how much you're going to pay them in return for the secrets, the regularity of the supply, and how much money they'll get. In less rich countries, they probably would get a cash payment maybe every month, maybe in a foreign currency, which is worth a lot on their local black market. And the rest will be a much larger sum paid into, say, a trust account in another country on the other side of the world where the banking system is more accommodating and trustworthy. You will go to cocktail parties, dinner parties and whatnot, if you think certain guests may be from the areas in which you're seeking secrets. A key practice is international conferences. Now, they may be in Paris, London, New York or something, and some key decision makers in the country you're serving in, who you strongly suspect will have access to the secrets you want, may go to those conferences overseas. So you may go overseas to try to bump into them at the conference. But generally, any conference that's happening in the country in which you're serving, if you think anybody from the areas you're interested in will go there, will attend the conference, and conferences usually run over 2 or 3 days. So you've got a banquet, dinners, lunches, you have coffee breaks in the morning and the afternoon sessions. So you look at who's attending the conference, you make sure you can get in there. Sometimes it's easily done, sometimes it's not. But you will attend the whole duration of the conference, and by hook or by crook, sometimes it's easily done, sometimes it's not. You, right up to the last minute before the conference starts, you get the guest list, the attendance list, and you go through that with a fine-tooth comb and identify in advance the people you want to get alongside. This 10, top 5, top 2, top 1. And so if you can, you track down, which is generally easy these days with Google and that, you track down their photograph so you know what they look like. And when the conference starts, you're all ready to pick out the people you're aiming at. And during the coffee break in the morning or the afternoon, you might get alongside them and just say, "Oh, hello, how are you?" And usually people are wearing name tags, which can be very helpful. And you say, "Oh, I noticed you work in such and such a place." And so where do you work? And you get to chatting. I mean, human beings are social animals. When you go to conferences, you usually have a lot of highly intelligent people attending and a lot of often even more highly intelligent people as keynote speakers and whatnot. So it's not hard to engage someone in conversation. And you start to identify mutual interests. And classical ploy is that if you're working out of an embassy, for example, you may say, oh, I've got a challenge at the moment. There are lots of good ambassadors around, but I've been quite unlucky. I've got one just between you and me who can't really string two sentences together. And he's lumbered me with the task of doing a major dispatch. And, I've only been here in your country for a short time so far, and I really don't know where to start. I'm thinking of starting on this and that point, but I'm not too sure. And usually the other person will say, well, look, I don't mean to be instructive, but you are new in my country. I wouldn't start there. This is how I'd start it. Then you'd say, wow, God, I would never have thought of that. Well, I'd love to draw on your wisdom more on a thing like this. And you just sort of move it along a bit. You don't push it too far. And usually you exchange contact details, name cards, whatever, and say, I would love to shout you a cup of coffee sometime so that we could talk about this more, but you're probably very busy. So, no, we'll see what we can do. And quite often, if it's likely to work well, a week later, they'll ring you and take you out to lunch. And it just grows from there. And eventually they start giving you more and more information that's sensitive. They may actually give you or show you a documentary report, highly classified. And they will, of course, start saying things like, I'll never let anybody else know that I'm telling you this. And it just grows out of that. And then eventually, after some months, there's no average, but you could probably say 6 months to 9 months, you bring it to a point where you have pushed the envelope far enough with them for them to know that there's some other dimension to your life. You haven't confronted it directly, but they've got an inkling of what you might be up to. And you've probably also indicated by that stage that you're willing to reward them. And the reciprocity won't be you give me highly classified secrets and I'll give you some in return. You have to be very careful that your reciprocity is displayed in other ways. For example, in some countries where alcohol may be dreadfully expensive, the potential agent or the recruited agent has a brother or sister getting married soon. And inside the family, they've been tasked with buying the alcohol. And in that country, it may cost $10,000 to buy all the alcohol on the black market for the wedding. And you may say, well, you realise I'm, working in the embassy, I get duty free. And instead of you paying $500 US on the black market for a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label, I can get it for 50 cents. So give me the pleasure of handling that for you. But of course, you and I will need to work out how you explain the acquisition of the grog to your family. Oh, that won't be any problem. We can take care of that. So, you sort of grow the relationship in that way. In many, many ways, it runs parallel to a normal friendship that's evolving between two intelligent people who have identified mutual interest. But it's just that you're steering it, you're controlling it, you have an ulterior motive. And not only that, you're guarded in the sense that you never let this friendship, in inverted commas, across a certain line.
So you've slowly ratcheted up this relationship over a period of months. He or she now seeming like they're ready to be pitched. There's obviously a point at which that relationship will take on a formal dimension. And it seems to me anyway like a critical juncture with risks for both you and the potential agent. Describe how you make that pitch. What's the process there?
Well, the first thing to say there is that in meeting this person, say 4 months ago, and now bringing it up to this level just before you make a pitch. A spy operates on a long distance umbilical cord back to their headquarters. And everything you do, once you think someone has that access and they're starting to talk, you start to build up a relationship, you start to write all of this up for your headquarters. And you're constantly sending updates back. And so by the time you get to this stage to make a pitch, you will have told your headquarters you think you might bring it on next week or the week after. And back in your headquarters, there'll be people usually who have already served in the country in which you're serving. And there are people working in the security part of your spy service and others who are monitoring the situation, and they read everything you're writing on this case. So when you come up to the level of a pitch, you put in a recruitment proposal to your headquarters, and in that you address everything. It's exhaustive. The number of times you've met, the places you've met, how you rate their personality, their psychological stability, their trustworthiness. Might they be selling their wares to other spies around the place? You consider everything. Might they even be working with the local security service? And so you've got to look at everything like that. And all of these things you throw up for your headquarters consideration. So their disposition in general is to be helpful. And so before you make the pitch, you will have put in your recruitment proposal and your headquarters will have approved it, and then you go ahead and do it. So on that usually night that you do it, as we've said, the agent has already been groomed in that sort of way. You know they're already sort of coming halfway across to meet you. And you generally start off by saying, gee, this latest batch of stuff you've just given me, they're going to love that back home. You've been using these vague terms, but you know that they know more or less what you're talking about. So you say, as you already know, I'll be eternally grateful for the way in which you helped me. And it's certainly not doing my career any harm, but I'd like to make it worth your while in a more substantial way. And so if we could sort of expand our relationship and whatnot, maybe even the sorts of things we're discussing and you're giving me valuable material on, I could make it more worth your while. And usually the agent knows exactly where you're going. And they're with you. They're walking alongside you, usually. And they'll say, well, just be a little more explicit and we can make a deal. And you say, well, we probably need to up the regularity. We need to expand the range of topics a bit. And if that flow were to become regular, I could reward you in certain ways. I know a major problem you and your spouse have is you're educating 2 of your children overseas, and that's enormously expensive. Well, I could cover the school fees, living allowance, and that. You'd naturally have to be careful how you explain how this is happening. Or it might be a payment in kind. And you then would start talking about actual amounts of money and on what basis, and would they sign receipts? Agents often sign regular monthly receipts. So usually they're ready to meet you halfway, and boom, when it happens, it's exhilarating, but you don't necessarily display that. You may reach across the table and shake hands, but then all sorts of new vistas, dangers that are lurking there open up for you, because if you've gone ahead, which you often do, and you've revealed it to that agent exactly who you are and who you work for, then it's a whole new ballgame of danger for you. And one of the key dangers is that further down the track, possibly even the next night, but say a year, 3 years down the track, the agent may get cold feet for whatever reason. And you're only too aware of the fact, particularly if it's not too long after you've recruited them. If they get cold feet, they can go off to the local security service and say, hey, this person has been sort of grooming me for some time now, and about 2 months ago or 6 months ago, they sort of recruited me in their terms. This is who they work for. This is how much they're paying me and everything. So I've done as much as I can do as a loyal citizen, you know. So I'll write it all up for you, give you all the details, their address and all of that. And over to you. I can do no more to help my country. And there's suddenly a national hero. And in many parts of the world, you'll be pulled in, tortured, and you won't survive.
So this nearly happened to you, right, Warren? So towards the end of your career, you were serving in a Middle East country, a place which would have carried a lot of risk for any Western intelligence officer. What was it like to have your cover blown in that situation?
Well, I must point out, my cover wasn't blown by an agent. I was never betrayed by an agent. Perversely, I wasn't betrayed by a traitor. Oddly, my cover was blown by my ambassador. He didn't want an intelligence operation in his embassy, in inverted commas, and he and his cohort willfully blew the cover of my colleague and I and our intelligence operation. Now, this is way back, and the Australian Prime Minister of the day was a very overtly pro-Israel Prime Minister. No bad thing. He did some wonderful things for Israel, managed to get Russian Jewish dissidents out of the Soviet Union into Israel. So that was all wonderful, but I was warned when I arrived in the Middle East by my Five Eyes colleagues. If your cover is blown, the local security people will say, what the hell would Australian spies be doing here in the Middle East? You know, we expect them to be in Asia, but here, and with a prime minister like that, this person or the pair of us have to be working for Mossad, using their low profile to cover Mossad operations. And that then, where we were, was anathema. If you got pulled in, you wouldn't survive. So there were all sorts of dangers. And, the oddest thing for a spy is not to be betrayed by a traitor agent, but betrayed from, in effect, inside your own system. But you don't have time to savour the irony.
What happens in that situation then? What happened to you when that cover was blown and all of a sudden you were facing these risks to yourself?
Well, all hell breaks loose. Now, your cover can be blown in a variety of ways and to varying degrees. But when you first learn that your cover has been blown, you've got to try to ascertain to what degree, to whom, who knows. I mean, ultimately, the big question is, does the local security service know? Or the person to whom my cover has been blown, will they immediately pass it on to the security service? Will they be pulled off the street tonight? So you immediately make contact with your colleagues in the Five Eyes Club and any others who know what you're doing and may support you, and tell them what you've learned. They'll give you their judgment on that, and they will immediately, we all help each other out, set off in a quest to find out how your cover has been blown. So you activate that system, and then you start talking to other people who may know, but you work to the worst possible scenario. You don't think, I think it's only a minor thing, a teeny weeny little thing, I'll sleep on it for a week and see what happens. You can't do that. So you're reacting to the worst possible scenario, and you've got to look at whether you can actually have any contact from this point on with your stable of agents. You've got to look at, say, if you're working out of an embassy or corporation, you've got to be mindful of the people who are immediately working around you. The local security service may not touch you. They may watch you for months and months to identify your stable of agents and then pull all of them in quickly and then you at the same time. But beforehand or along the way, instead of touching you, they may pull some of the people, particularly younger people, in your cover organisation off the street and give them the drug treatment or even torture them or compromise them in whatever way to try to find out from them what they know about your intelligence operation. So lots of people can suffer. It's not just you and your immediate colleagues. So you've got the stable of agents, you've got that world of people, and you're also worried about how if you are declared persona non grata and kicked out of the country with a lot of publicity, or you just disappear, but the local host government makes it known you're a spy, but you've escaped, but they don't know where you are. They've killed you, tortured you and killed you. So you have to also take into consideration how all that will blow back on your country and your government. Your country may have significant trade relations with the country you're in, with the whole region. And so if what's happening to you all comes out in a blaze of publicity, that could have a very negative impact on your country's exports. So, you have to be mindful of the big picture right down to something that's half the size of a pinhead. And you're doing all of this at the same time. And this is where, as a member of the Five Eyes Club, Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we all help each other. And we help each other beyond that too. So the help of your colleagues is absolutely essential at a time like this. You get a lot of emotional support from your fellow spies. But in a nutshell, what's it like? All hell breaks loose, and you can totally lose sight of the fact that maybe for 1, 2, 3 days, you haven't eaten anything. You haven't really had anything to drink. You certainly haven't had any sleep. Maybe you haven't even been home. You can't risk going back to your home. In my case, their warning signals were sent. I wasn't ultimately arrested. My brake cables were cut on my car, which where I was always parked outside. Tyres were slashed. And then one night walking back down a side street, which I did carefully to my home, I was set upon by half a dozen men, as far as I know they were men, and I was roughed up, beaten up, but nothing was stolen. But we interpreted that as a warning that I should get out, and we thought what it meant was the host government valued the imports coming from Australia on pretty generous terms more than they wanted a kerfuffle over me. But I was warned soon after I knew my cover was blown, in a remarkable way, that my cover had been fully blown, and inside the local security service there was a group who believed I was working as a front for Mossad, and they wanted to pull me in and torture me and kill me. And another group said, no, there are other things at stake. And so this warning I was given caused me to be pulled out quickly, and later my colleague. And so we avoided anything bad. But if we'd lingered much longer, I think the more aggressive group that believed that I was working for Mossad would have pulled me in, and my colleague. and it would have been nasty.
Had you made preparations in advance for such a scenario? Did you have escape plans in place for such an event?
Definitely. My colleague and I simply became one person, just one brain, functioned as one, and we're rusted on for life as a consequence of that. But we immediately consulted our colleagues in the Five Eyes Club, and we looked at ways we could get out. My colleague and I worked out how we might be able to get out quickly through the airport system, to what extent might all or any of our Five Eyes colleagues be able to pressure the host government to let us go through the airport system. We worked out a plan to escape across country to the northwest and get out from across the border there. We had another plan to go south and get over the border there. And we had all that worked out elaborately, down to train schedules, trekking across open land, carrying large amounts of cash for us for when we crossed the border and went into another country. And you think of all of these things at the same time. But did we plan it? Wow, did we plan it?
And so to most people, such an experience would have just been unbearable. I mean, everything you've described, the stress, the strain, the possible consequences and ramifications of what happened to you, most people wouldn't be able to deal with. So what were you feeling during this time? How were you coping?
Well, when you look back on it, it's very interesting. The first thing is you don't panic. But you don't sit down and say, what is the first thing I must not do? Don't panic. You're beyond that already. You don't panic. If you're going to panic, you're beyond that already. So you don't panic. And the funny thing is, you don't necessarily hear the head of your service back home, your spy service, saying, now remember what we've taught you, don't panic, work out your key priorities and go through them gradually. Boom! It just all happens in an instant. And, all of us talk about how in our lifetime in different places we've had a close shave in a car accident or whatever. And wow, when I was up against it, my life flashed before my eyes and my adrenaline was pumping. Well, your adrenaline is certainly pumping when this happens. But it goes beyond that. Your mind, all the power of the human mind. I mean, we're often told the average human being ever only uses 10% of their brain capacity. Well, you can actually use much more than 10, but all of that is activated and it focuses in to a sort of a laser beam. And that's the sort of concentration and focus you have on your priorities, and to the utter exclusion of everything else that's unnecessary. Like sleeping and eating and whatnot. And you focus ruthlessly on this. You become almost, in artificial intelligence terms, almost like a supercomputer. And your emotions are under control. If you think, I haven't slept for 3 days, I've got to get at least 15 minutes. You'll go to a toilet, put the seats down, sit down, and you will make sure you sleep for 10 minutes. Or 15 minutes. You become incredibly in control of yourself. And at the end of the day, it's because you seem to be that sort of person that you were recruited in the first place into the spy service. And I remember when this happened to my colleague and I, we said to each other, I can hear my mum, I can hear my dad saying, remember, don't panic, focus on the key task of the moment. So you actually go back not just to your training in the spy service, but you go back to the very upbringing you've had in your family.
Thank you so much, Warren. This sounds like an incredible experience that happened to you. Obviously, very traumatic, but it's an amazing story of the risks in espionage, but also human resilience. And it's been a delight to have your insights into the trade and some of what goes wrong. We thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And a big Spybrary thank you to our guest today, Warren Reed, and to our guest host, Bevan G Roberts. Links, notes, resources can be found at spybrary.com/192. Really curious to hear from you about this type of episode. Do you want to hear more of them? Were there any questions that Bevan didn't ask that you wish he had? Come let us know on our Facebook group. Is probably the best place. We have almost 3,000 fellow spy fans that talking all things spy daily in that group, and you can find it at spybrary.com/Facebook. And as always, if you enjoyed today's show, please do consider leaving us a rating and review. That really helps us to continue producing premium spy free content. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Spybrary podcast. You don't have to wait for the next episode. Join the conversation happening now at facebook.com/Spybrary and on Twitter @Spybrary.